Oh, good. Thank you so much. You've been missing a lot of interesting presentation yesterday by by our speakers. So I interest you to pay attention and learn management. On the first session, we are going to start by Professor, who will be having other speakers. So I will need your attention and your interaction by asking questions and providing ideas with about the presentation.
Is the sound clear now? All right, because the micro is a bit far away. So some students their own embassy. So France has 2 embassies in Brussels. The European Commission is deciding everything. Actually, what's being decided in Brussels is a hiring of a great number of civil servants, and so these legislations are being implemented at national level. So yesterday, if you do remember, I mentioned this Water Framework Directive pertains to the coastal waters, including the aquifers and the lakes. It's impossible to implement such a directive from Brussels because Europe ranges from Portugal to Estonia, from South. As a result, that the state authorities, and they can be national authorities, they can be regional, the programming, the strategies for the basins in order to achieve good status water for the aquifers and for the surface water. So what administration are obligated? So the strength of the European Union, and I think it's important to explain a bit the background before I delve into the different legislation, is this common denominator, is the ability to oblige undertakings and to oblige the citizens to abide by one single rule. And that will be most of the rules that I will explain. So nature protection, water protection, you have one single directive, and these directives have to be implemented with some leeway by the 27 member states. I can tell you that some of my lectures are quite elaborate when it comes to institutional systems. My task is to give my very best to my students. Yesterday, I a bit more time today for discussion. Or in Hungary, civil servants' wage or salary is much lower than a Belgian or Luxembourg civil servant. A bank director in Hungary is likely to earn less than a bank director in France. So you have these gaps. The fact of the matter is that this internal market is one of the biggest markets in the world. It's a unified market thanks to these legal rules, you know? And so it's a market of 500 million consumers. And in consuming many goods that are imported, be it from China, but with respect to soybeans for the cattle from Brazil, regarding cocoa, the goods are being imported from Nigeria, Sao Tome, Ivory Coast, Ghana, a bit from Guinea-Conakry. So the European consumers do reckon upon imports of American technology. Look at the American service with Google, but also material goods from the different continents. And in so doing, the European consumers have we call a global footprint, so they impact the environment on the other continent. So I gave you yesterday the example of the Cerrado in Brazil, in southern Brazil, which is a kind of huge savanna. There's been a boost in the production of soybean for the North American market, the USA market, and also the European market. So the European cattle is fed by GM soybean produced in Brazil and Paraguay. Brazil has lost half of the Cerrado in 30 years. So the Cerrado 30 years ago was nearly intact. Today, half of it is gone. So a huge loss as a matter of biodiversity, huge release of greenhouse gases. So it means that Europeans do have an impact upon the global environment, in particular in Brazil, because they eat meat from the European cattle, but European cattle is being fed by soybean produced in Paraguay and Brazil. And that's what we call the global footprint. And so with this huge, significant global footprint, the Europeans do cross what we call, what scientists call planetary boundaries. Now we'll explain what are the planetary boundaries. And actually the whole humanity is crossing this threshold, these borders. There has been an attempt by the EU for many years to regulate environmental and climate impacts that are embedded in products that are imported in the EU. So the idea is that the consumers should pay the price for the impact taking place abroad, or that we are going to regulate the products that are acceptable. I will give you a number of examples regarding fisheries, regarding GMOs, because that can have also an impact upon the export of Rwanda to the EU. Third point is the European Green Deal that I've been really contemplating. I gave many conferences in many countries, about 25 conferences in 2 years, about the evolution of the Green Deal, dozens of pages. I had some sleepless nights. But I am an academic, I am independent, and I have the freedom to encompass with a broad vision, whereas the politicians or the civil servants are much more specialized. So I will explain you the paradigmatic shift, and there are some lessons to be learned also by African countries, because it seems to me that many African countries do face, with respect to energy, for instance, the same challenges that we do face. And finally, as you're aware, the export of coffee from Rwanda to the internal market of the European Union is going to be impacted by a new regulation regarding forest conservation. And so I will try to explain you in detail the manner in which this regulation functions. So I was, frankly speaking, I was a bit disappointed because my colleagues organizing the conference have been inviting people from the coffee industry to attend at least today's conference. We're going to comment upon that regulation and the decline to come. But perhaps they're not aware of the significant impact or the number of papers they will have to fill in order to continue to export to the European Union. And so I'll spend a bit of time on this. So 3 issues, or impact as consumers, eating chocolate, importing steel, importing soybean, the manner in which we've been trying to regulate some industrial products, and then this Green Deal that's leading to a change as the manner in which our economy will work. So the scientists, for somewhat 10 years, have been establishing different boundaries. In case they are crossed, they are exceeded, it means that humanity is likely to be in peril. And among these boundaries, there is climate change, biosphere integrity, stratospheric ozone depletion, ocean acidification, water use, chemical compounds. So you can find these boundaries easily on the internet. A number of papers that are accessible online explaining you. It appears that among the 9 boundaries, humanity is already crossing 7 of these 9 boundaries. So it means that slowly we are moving toward an extremely complicated situation for many of our citizens. Europeans, of course, do cross the boundary. Europeans, being wealthy consumers, have a higher impact. So if we compare an average Rwandese with its level of income and its level of consumption with an average Belgian or an average German, it's obvious that the global impact of the Belgian and German is maybe 10, 12 times higher than the impact of the Rwandese. So things are in balance. As I explained to you, an average Belgian emits from industries, from plants, is far less significant when I start to work 34 years ago with environmental legal issues. And that's again thanks to a bit contrasted. There have been improvements regarding the production of energy and the production of goods, from car factories to pulp mills. However, in other sectors, the greenhouse gas emissions are still increasing. And so the decoupling, the idea of the European Commission is to boost the economy, but thanks to technologies to reduce, on the one hand, the greenhouse gas emissions and to minimize the climate change impact, but also to reduce this impact. So according to the European Environmental Agency, this is not happening, this is not occurring. So maybe the Commission is a bit naive in believing in this creed. Technological development so far has been associated with increased consumptions rather than the reverse. And so we call that the rebound effect. I don't know whether you have been, you already heard in universities the concept of rebound effect? I give you an illustration. So the car producers are obliged and they are competing in placing on the market cars that are much more effective, and instead of consuming like the US cars 9-10 liters to drive 100 kilometers, some European cars, they can reach an average of 4.55 liters. So car producers, in particular Renault or Fiat, they succeed in halving the consumption of energy. So at the outset, one could imagine that the consumers will consume far less gasoline because it's not going to travel more. Because the price of traveling is reduced for the fact that the car consumes less, the scientists, the experts noticed that people travel twice as much. And that's called the rebound effect. So the whole energy efficiency, so there are very strict rules regarding the placing on the market of different devices. Such a device in Europe, it's placed upon obligation to reduce year by year the consumption of energy. The consumer just spend more time in consuming. And so the fact is that we produce more and more energy, although the device, the technological devices, are getting more and more efficient. The discussion is starting among experts to assess the impact of artificial intelligence. Apparently, artificial intelligence consumes a huge amount of energy. Percent of the energy production is dedicated to technologies, to computers. So at the outset, the claim, the creed was, okay, we are going to replace paper with online documentation. But it has another, Europe still reckoned to a great extent to fuels and to gas, so to speak. So here are the slides regarding Africans, and you know the challenge faced in Angola in agricultural lands in order to foster a very intensive type of agriculture, and that has an impact upon the labor force, because the more intensive the agriculture is becoming, the less number of workers you need. So Africa is going to become a kind of competitive ground that are in need to import food commodities to feed a population in the 30 years. And that's likely to have an impact. And so the Europeans in eating chocolate, of course, the cocoa is not produced in Italy, it's produced in Ghana or in Gabon, and so it must be exported. And so that really highlights that the fact that be it the wood, the soy pine, the cocoa, the coffee, it's leading to deforestation, and the European importers do contribute to deforestation taking on place on other continents in consuming these goods. And according to many experts, one of the main drivers of deforestation is not only poverty, but it's agricultural expansion. And so that's the case I explained about the expansion of soybean production in the Cerrado. That has been halving the size of the existing biome. And so agricultural expansion, according to some source, drive almost 90% of the global deforestation. Of course, the figures vary from one country. This is a global figures, they are a bit tricky. The situation is really likely to vary from Gabon to Brazil, from Paraguay to Thailand. So this is rather abstract. And livestock grazing, and that's related to the meat consumption, and I explained that according to many nutritionists, Western consumers consume far too much meat, and that's giving rise to an epidemic of obesity. So the World Health Organization is focusing pretty much on obesity today, as in the case of Rwanda, as I've seen so far. You don't have obese people in your country. But it's the case. If you look at Mexico, at USA, and even at UK, UK is being plagued by an epidemic of obesity because the consumers eat cheap food, eat bad food, and so eat too much meat. And so the livestock grazing is responsible for almost 40% of forest loss. When it comes to timber, in 2020, when the UK was still a member state of the European Union, the 28 states imported 1 billion tons of primary tropical timber products, be it logs, plywood, sawnwood, veneer. So it means that there is hardly no economic values taking place in the exporting country, be it Gabon, be it RDC, be it Congo, because they just export nearly raw materials. The share of secondary tropical timber products is much lower. It's only 175 tons in 2020, in contrast to 1 million tons. And of course, there the exporting countries has an economic added value because the wood is treated in Indonesia in order, or in Vietnam, in order to produce doors, windows, furniture. So there are sharp contrasts. Thailand and Indonesia have been quite good in developing their furniture industries, and so what's being exported from these countries is really the level of furniture. Whereas African countries didn't succeed to reindustrialize and to export secondary tropical timber products. But all in all, it means that the EU is depending upon tropical wood, and then the question is how these tropical forests are being exploited. If they are exploited in accordance with the rule of the certification FSC, so I mentioned yesterday, you remember FSC, which are quite strict rules, the production will be a long-term production. It will be a sustainable use production in accordance with the Convention on Biodiversity. In case you have companies are just seeking profit to the maximum, what are they doing? They do corrupt the civil servants. The civil servants turn a blind eye, and they export the wood without carrying out a sustainable use policy on the long term. It means that the host country is at loss, because it's going to lose valuable production forests for mismanagement. And then again, that was my take on message yesterday, good governance and the rule of law matters. If you want to carry out smart policies, you need the rule of law, you need good governance. If that fails, then it's leading quickly to an over-exploitation of the resources. My country, Belgium, is one, with the Netherlands next door, is one of the main importers on the planet of tropical products. And so, many of the tropical wood today imported in the Netherlands and Belgium is certified according to FSC, but not everything. And so, when the wood is not certified, then there is always a question, where is it coming from? Has it been leading to overexploitation of the resource of the other countries? Brazil is actually the largest supplier of primary and secondary timber products. It's not only soybeans, but it's also timber. It's followed by Cameroon. So Cameroon has extensive forests along the border with Gabon and the border with Congo-Brazzaville. Indonesia, which mostly export furniture, Gabon, Malaysia, Congo-Brazzaville, and Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast has been losing most of its tropical forests because of mismanagement, because of the civil war that has been lasting 10 years. So most of the national parks in Ivory Coast are, unlike the Rwandese park, they've been destroyed or occupied by villages. So maybe tomorrow morning Ivory Coast won't succeed to export timber for the absence of proper management. So the EU is considered as the world's biggest per capita importer of commodities embodying deforestation. So EU plays a role when it comes to forest. And so I give more precise figures regarding wood, cattle, soy, soybean, palm oil, cocoa, and coffee. It should lead by 2030 to a deforestation rate of 248,000 hectares. And that's the impact of the EU. But in addition, you have to add to this the impact of the Chinese import, of the Japanese import. Japan is also a very wealthy nation. Japan protects very well its forest, but it doesn't protect the forest of Papua New Guinea. So the wood being consumed in Japan is imported from Papua New Guinea, but without any strict rules. You see? But in North America has also a huge impact, in particular when it comes to meat. If you look at biscuits, at foodstuff, there's a lot of palm oil. Palm oil, and I've seen that be it in Southeast Asia, be it across Africa, palm oil production has been replacing time and again native forest. So palm oil is maybe a source of richness, but it's also a source of biodiversity loss. Because I invite you to go across, you students, across a palm oil plantation. you will see that there are no birds, there are no mammals. It's extremely poor. And the soils are extremely poor, so it has palm production. So you see, you understand the linkage between the world trading activities and the impact it can have, positive impact as a matter of employment, as a matter of economic growth, but it's always counterbalanced, outweighed by environmental and climate change impact. So that's the background. So there is also a level of awareness among citizens in a country where there are hundreds of NGOs, many NGOs working on development projects. Many Belgian NGOs have projects in Rwanda, they have also projects in Benin. They used to have projects in Burkina Faso before the civil war occurred. So the Belgians are quite active in engaging, not only with respect to their own affairs, but also globally, regarding education, regarding development of villages. And so, of course, there is this consumer pressure, in particular among the elites, because the people who think about their global impacts, they belong more to a highly educated category of persons who have been in universities, who have been in colleges. And so these people, this category of citizens, do influence the political process. They have the association that are arguing in Brussels in favor of tougher rules in order to regulate the global impact of our consumer patterns. So EU, according to many experts, has become a global norm setter. So when standards are placed upon cars, so there are new standards on cars and fuels that are extremely strict. So I was explaining lately to Joseph Désiré that the Europeans won't be able to purchase in 2035 new fuel consuming cars, so there won't be any more market. So the market will be limited to electric cars, electric powered cars. So it will simply be possible in 2036, 2037, 2038 to purchase second-hand fuel-powered cars. But all the new cars that are going to be placed, be it imported, be it produced in Europe, will have to be electric. Which means significant change. And that's going to reduce the level of greenhouse gases emissions, that's going to reduce the level of air pollution in cities, that's going to reduce also the noise level in cities, which is a major environmental impairment, as you're aware. And so the Chinese, they look very closely what's happening in Brussels, because the Chinese understand that's a very huge market. And so the Chinese obtained recently for a number of cars the authorization to place these electric cars on the market. And the Chinese cars are less expensive than the French electric cars. So there starts to be a huge competition across the continent between the Chinese cars that got authorized because they meet the safety standards and the new generation of electric cars, in particular developed by the French and the Italian companies. But, so you see, these norms have a global impact for the size of the internal market. However, the EU has not really been able or not been willing to regulate environment and climate impact that are embodied in traded products so far. So there have been, these last 30 years, few regulations really restricting in products the global impact regarding the release of gases that destroy the ozone cap or the release of greenhouse gas emissions. Because the Europeans so far didn't want to impact upon what we call the process and production methods taking place away. There is controversies because according to many lawyers, the World Trade Organization treaties prohibit the importing states to regulate, the state can regulate the safety of the product, can regulate the hazardousness of a product, but cannot regulate the manner in which the product is produced abroad. I give you an example. I buy a toy from China in Brussels. In case the toy contains prohibited chemicals in the EU, although the chemical in question is not prohibited in China, the toy cannot be placed on the market. So the shop is selling an illegal toy, and that ware must be removed from the market because it's illegal. So that's a question of safety. So there are a number of foodstuffs are coming from other continents that are blocked at the border because they contain a too huge amount of pesticides and they exceed the standards set out by the food law legislation in the EU. And accordingly, they cannot be traded. That's the quality of the product. It means the content of the product, whether the water, pH or the water, different chemical components are exceeded, or whether the packaging of this bottle of water exceeds a number of thresholds. So that's an easy question. World Trade Organization accepts that, in as much as it's not leading to discriminatory practice. And so far, in the World Trade Organization, there's still been an ongoing discussion for 30 years on process and production methods. Of course, the vast majority of the trade lawyers say, okay, you cannot regulate the manner in which the coffee is being produced in Rwanda or in Ethiopia. That's not your business. You can just regulate the amount of chemicals that's found in the coffee being imported in France or in Belgium or in Luxembourg. So that's quite controversial. But nevertheless, there are examples, and often I explain to trade lawyers. You imagine that I don't always have a very friendly relationship with trade lawyers, given that I'm considered to be an environmentalist. I always give the example of the fishing regulation, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing regulation. So it's quite easy to understand. So it's a regulation of 2008 applying directly to all the member states. And so when fish is being imported or exported or harvested in the Mediterranean Sea or the North Sea or the Baltic Sea, it cannot be placed in the market whenever the fishing activities were illegal, were not being reported to the national fishing authorities, or whenever the state has not been regulated the fishing activities. It means that there is no proper administration looking at the manner in which the fish is being harvested. And so that regulation applies actually FAO, the United Nations Food Agriculture Organization, treaty that bans this practice. So the idea of the treaty is to force every state to have fishery authorities, to have quotas, to have regulations on the fishing techniques, on the fishing devices, and whenever things are not correct, the fish catch cannot be placed on the market. Of course, in having a kind of tough regulation of that kind, the EU has been placing on the blacklist countries like Bangladesh, Thailand, even Vietnam. I think there were 6 or 7 countries. There were EU inspectors going to these countries, making assessments, carrying out investigation, and reaching the conclusion that the administration is ineffective. That's why I lived in Thailand, so I knew how it worked there. It was really completely unregulated in the 1990s, 1980s. And so means there is no internal market. There is no possibility to export to Europe. They can export to China, to Japan, but they are deprived to get the access. And the reaction of these countries is say, oh, we cannot trade with the Europeans. We are losing money. So we set up an administration, and the administration is going to enforce the Thai or the Vietnamese or the Bengali rules regarding fishery activities. So actually, if you look at that kind of regulation, it's clear that the manner in which we control whether the fish are harvested in accordance with the national legislation. So the regulation does not determine the type of device that must be employed in Thailand and Vietnam. Just say you must act according to your own rules, but you must establish. But of course, that's getting into the process methods, which can be somewhat controversial when it comes to World Trade Organization. In June, early June, Senegal has been placed on the orange list, and if they don't move quickly, they will be placed on the black list of the European Commission. It means that fish exported from Senegal cannot be placed on the internal market. They don't have access. And it's a big economic activity for Senegal to fish and to export the fish to Spain, to Portugal, and to food. So you see the impact. Well, there's very little palm oil in Rwanda, but I've seen lately in Cameroon there is really an expansion with the hedge funds really investing and leading to conversion of tropical forests, good secondary forests that have been smartly exploited for decades by forestry companies that are being converted in palm oil plantations, in particular to satisfy the national markets. And the EU has been, palm oil issues have been really controversial in Europe. At the outset, the idea of the Renewable Energy Directive was to say, okay, we are too much dependent upon the traditional fuels, gasoline, diesel. We need to replace these fuels by bioenergy, by fuels produced from corn, from a different type of agricultural commodities. And that gave rise very quickly to a debate. Say, okay, instead of getting the fuels from oil fields, we get it from farmlands. It's just going to lead to farmland expansion, and it's going to encroach upon wildlife habitat, upon natural or semi-natural habitats. So it's not a good option. So the Renewable Energy Directive has been modified time and again, so it was really a hefty debate in the European Parliament regarding the type of standard. And regarding palm oil, the European Commission, in accordance with the directive, has been setting up thresholds regarding what type of palm oil can be imported in Europe as an ersatz of a fuel. And the standards leads to the prohibitions of deforestation taking place abroad. Indonesia and Malaysia, which are major palm oil producers, have been quite upset. They've been lodging a claim against the EU before the World Trade Organization in Geneva, and the case is being played. We are waiting for the decision of the panel regarding the consistency of the EU decision with the World Trade Organization. So here, clearly, the manner in which we frame the regulatory standards with palm oil is not produced in Italy or in Greece or in Portugal. It has an impact upon the production of in Indonesia and Malaysia. And so it has been obliging the producers in these countries to develop certified skills. And these certifications highlight that the palm oil has been produced without having an impact upon primary or secondary forests. But although they implement certification, they still dislike the EU regulation. So that's giving me the chance to just to mention the Green Deal. which is really a reform that started 4 years ago, with a flurry of communications ranging from agriculture to forestry to nature to chemicals to transport to industry, where the European Commission has been contemplating a number of changes, a number of modifications of existing legislation, but also the adoption of new legislation. So a case in point that's extremely controversial is the CBAM. It's the idea that you know that steel produced in Europe is expensive. Why is it expensive? Because energy is expensive. Energy is more expensive in Europe than in the USA. The labor force is expensive because we have kind of very high social security standards. We have high employee tax, high employers tax. So of course the steel is much more expensive than the steel being produced in Brazil or in Japan. And so the idea is to say, okay, the steel industry in Europe is obliged to purchase on the market a certificate for each ton of CO2 that's emitted by the plant. So in case the plant emits on a yearly basis 10,000 tons of CO2, the company has to purchase 10,000 certificates. The value of the certificates, it's a demand and supply system, varies. So it went a few months ago up to 92 euros a certificate. Now it has been lowering down. There is an oversupply of certificates. But then you multiply 10,000 multiplied by 80, 800,000 euros that the company must pay, in addition to all the tax. So that's a burden placed upon the company producing steel, be it in Luxembourg, be it in France, be it in Italy. And so that means that the steel produced in Japan is, or in China, is much more competitive, not only because the labor costs are lower, but because they don't take part in carbon markets. So there is no greenhouse gas price. And so the new regulation, the CBAM regulation, the idea is to say, okay, the emissions taking place in China and Japan, but the importer of the steel has to pay for the emission, although there is no carbon market over there. And the price, it's kind of a system similar to a certificate, and the price will be similar to the certificate that the European company has to buy on the European market. So it means that 1 ton of steel imported from China in a year from now, the price will be increased by 80 euros or 85 euros or 90 euros according to the price of the certificate in Europe. So that clearly has an impact upon the manner in which the third states conceive their climate change policy. Say, you want to export your steel, or your cement, or your nickel into the internal market, you have to take into consideration climate change issue, in spite of the fact that you don't care about it, and you have to pay the price. And so the other countries such as China, North America, they say, okay, we disagree because actually you are obliging us to embark upon a carbon market. Maybe we don't want to have a carbon market, but you are forcing us in order to let us entering our products in new markets. And so that's the type of regulation that has been seen the light of day thanks to this reform. So I mentioned yesterday climate neutrality to be achieved by 2050. So all the emissions that will be still left, they will have to be absorbed by ecosystems, or they have to be stored in all mines. So there should be a zero emission. So although there might still be emissions, this emission will have to disappear by being absorbed. And that's that's the most ambitious legislation on the planet. All the other states are laggards in this respect. So the EU is kind of leading the way, but taking risk in so doing, because it means that the price of the product produced in Europe is likely to be much higher. In addition to the costs related to social security, to taxation, to the labor force. So this reform that came to an end with the regulation, the elections last June of the European Parliament, has been striking because it has been encompassing so many issues, so ranging from agriculture to forestry. It went very quickly in contrast to other reforms. So the politicians were overburdened by a wave of regulatory proposals to deal with. And these regulations, I mentioned often with respect to industrial law yesterday, the difference between hard law, so the agreements, the protocols that bind in the state, and the soft law is just documents saying, okay, you should do that. Here's not at all soft law, this is binding regulation. So, to come back to CBAM, the importer in Germany or in Belgium of foreign nickel will have to purchase on the market from the certificate. And the certificate value will be determined according to a supply-demand scheme. That's a genuine regulation. It's not a wish. Companies will be bound. And if they don't abide, if they don't purchase, they will likely to have to pay hefty administrative fines or to be prosecuted before criminal court. So you see the nature. And what matters is also that EU is a small continent deprived of natural resource. So today the European population is only 8% of the global population. In many countries the population decreases. So we are far less influential than we were 50, 60 or 70 years ago. And so we are aware that we need also to be active on the internal front in order to avoid to be completely at loss. And so there is a complementarity between the internal measures and the external measures. That's what I will explain. And regarding forestry, there are two major types of legislation. One of which I will comment is the regulation of March 2023 on deforestation-free products that's imposing a due diligence obligation upon the importers of different commodities such as coffee, cattle, wood products, cocoa. So it means that the whole supply chains regarding these commodities has to be subject to assessment, to risk analysis, to risk mitigation measures. So I spent a bit of time to explain that regulation because it's going to impact the export of Rwanda. So it's not yet fully into force, but it will be soon fully into force. Just before I took my holidays, there's been a political agreement to adopt a directive on corporate sustainability due diligence that also applies upon major companies employing more than 500 employees, due diligence obligation regarding the respect of human rights issues, among which many labor rights obligations, and also environmental obligations. So it means that all the major companies in Europe that have often supply chains across the world, they will have to employ consultants that are going to assess throughout every supply chain whether there's been no breach of labor rights or no breach of environmental obligations. That will have huge consequences. Of course, the companies that are not very happy about that, but on the other hand, there is a consumer pressure, there is a citizen pressure. The citizens don't want to invest in companies that are not taking care about the labor rights or the fundamental human rights obligations. So this directive is a broader scope because it can apply to Nike, the subsidiary of Nike USA in Europe, because they are above the threshold. It can apply to steel mill, it can apply to a pulp mill, It can apply to the metal industry. It can apply also to all the subsidiaries of the major American companies such as Google, Facebook, Meta, will be subject to the due diligence obligation because they have supply chains regarding all their products and technologies. So this is brand new. These texts are highly complicated for lawyers, so many law firms are being consulted in Brussels by foreign states, by foreign companies to assess what will be the obligations. And so that gave me, that's leading me to the fourth issue, is the internal and external EU policies regarding forest conservation. So I will begin with a number of internal rules, and then I will advance different regulations that have a worldwide impact. And so I will discuss the forest strategy, the biodiversity strategy. So this communication can be useful for the national authorities when they will planify the manner in which forests must be exploited or reforestation must occur. I will discuss the LULUCF that I mentioned yesterday, so to use agriculture and forestry as in wetland as sink. I will be short regarding CITES, and then I will really discuss the impact of the FLEX and the different treaties that have been concluded between the EU and African countries. And finally, then this new 2023 forest risk commodity regulation. So again, thanks for your attention, because it's quite technical and it's not always very easy to explain. So actually, the forest coverage in Europe is in decrease. So in the beginning of the 19th century, Europe has been highly deforested. Many remote regions in Europe were very poor, and people were really dependent on wood products, on charcoal. So charcoal was common in many remote areas in Europe. And around 1850, many of European countries decided to endorse a forestry policy because forest products were needed for the industrial growth, the industrial revolution, for military purposes. And so that led to kind of the establishment of administration and the enforcement of your rules that were quite strictly applied, and to say, okay, forests must be conserved in order to produce the wood needed for military purpose or economic purpose. Besides many remote rural areas, in particular in mountains, in desert areas have been abandoned by farmers. People are moving into big cities. I know that in Northern Europe, many remote farms have been abandoned, so farms that were exploited for 2-3 centuries. It's too remote, the soils are too poor, the women are getting highly educated, they go to college, to university, and they want to have, work in a service economy, and they move into the capitals. So it means that this land that were formerly exploited for agricultural purpose is being taken over by the forest. That has also an impact upon nature, because often the traditional agricultural practice are quite important for maintaining biodiversity. So in a pasture that has been not subject to fertilization, you have a high number of wildflowers, means high number of insects, more birds, more mammals. So the fact of having the forest covering everything is not always a good thing. But today, forests cover 43.5% of the EU space. And so the forest coverage is similar to the one of agriculture. and so it will continue to the size of the forests are going to continue to increase. However, many forests in Europe are under increasing strain, and so there's really a lot of scientific investigation, increased human activities, over-exploitations, too much tourism, urban sprawl, the impact of pollution, but also climate change. So lately, with the drought in the Hispanic Peninsula or in Greece, a number of forests have been burning. So the fact that Mediterranean forests burn from once in a while is not an ecological problem. It can be quite useful also. It's just in the national parks here, the manager of the national parks in Akagera, they will burn some patches of land to get rid of the bush in order to have more grasses for the zebras, for the antelopes. But the matter is the speed with which fires now occur. So if you have fires, big fires every 2 years, the soil is getting completely eroded and the vegetation does not come back. So if I look at the 2021 strategy on forest, the Commission, I quote, climate change has also brought to light previously hidden vulnerabilities, aggravating other destructive pressures such as pests. So in my country, many monocultures are destroyed by insects. And this insect is present because the summers are too warm. By pollution, by disease, and it affects forest fire regime. Tree cover loss has accelerated in the last decade because of extreme weather events and increase in harvesting for different purposes. And that's an official statement. Of course, the situation varies between northern France, between northern Spain, southern Spain. There are huge climatic, geographical differences in each nation, and the differences are even higher between the north and the southern Europe. But so that's a paradox. More forests, but the forests are losing their ecological quality. So the strategy for 2013 aims at fostering management forestry practice that preserve and restore biodiversity. So forest production is not only for the sake of production. Production must take into account biodiversity issues, because the more diverse the forest is, the more resilient the forest is against extreme events such as a drought or flooding. So the aim is to enhance the resilience of these ecosystems. And so the Commission aims at enticing the Member States to really integrate biodiversity, but of course in taking into account different natural conditions, biogeographic and typology. So I really invite you, in particular students in forestry. Yesterday I discussed with different students who are in forestry faculties to look at the communications. It's a rather short communication, 30, but it's really, there are plenty of ideas, and these ideas have already been discussing between the commissions, the national authorities, the stakeholders. So it's not really a pro-environmental communication, but there is a shift towards really taking into consideration climate change issues, and biodiversity appears to be the kind of leverage that could help for us to play a role in mitigating the impact of droughts or floodings. And so in the communication you can see the reversing biodiversity loss will protect fully what remains of the primary forest. And what we discussed yesterday, reforestation and afforestation. So this is not only an issue for Rwanda, it's also an issue for the Europeans. Besides the forestry communication, there is also a biodiversity strategy, and the aim is in accordance with the Montreal coming targets. I mentioned 23 targets, one of which aims at enticing the states to protect a minimum of 30% of the land. So I forgot the figure of our colleague, the lecturer in geography yesterday. She mentioned the different national parks and protected area. I don't know percentage of protected areas in your country, but from a European point of view, it's really a challenge for industrialized countries such as the Netherlands, such as Belgium, because the space is occupied either by industry, by road networks, or by urbanization, or by intensive agriculture. So it means that there will be consequences. And so the idea is also that 10% of the territory, marine or land territory, must be strictly protected. So it means nature sanctuaries, national parks, where you cannot have a limited amount of human activities. So you see, I mentioned yesterday Montreal. That has already an impact upon the strategy developed in the EU, and will have an impact upon ambitious. You remember the coming Montreal, the aiming by 2030. It was adopted in 2000, 24 years ago. So in a quarter of a century, the state didn't achieve the main goal. But what matters is that by 2050, in 2030 I will be retired. But in 2050, maybe I will not be there anymore. All the degraded ecosystem will have to be restored. Urbanization will be, for the very first time, a huge investment. And now I see there are many companies, many banks, they start to think differently, because there will be jobs to be created. There will be investment to restore peatlands. So it will take time. But the aim is really to shift from a pure protection, stop the pollution, into a reintegration of nature in our society. I explained to you I wanted to go a bit more slowly today. We'll take a break for discussions and coffee maybe. But I will move a bit. There is a provision, Article 2, with respect to forest ecosystem. And the states are obliged, will be obliged to achieve an increasing trend, so it's a bit vague, increasing trend, and satisfactory level of standing trees, of lying deadwood. So in production forest, the idea is to remove the deadwood. Here it's to maintain the deadwood, because it's a source of biodiversity. To connect forests, often forests are disconnected for railway network, for highway network, for urbanization. So the idea is to reconnect forests to allow wildlife to move from one forest to another forest, to increase the stock of organic carbon, and to increase the tree species diversity, because it makes the forest more resilient. Jobs in planting 70,000 trees near Bhutan. So you see, this kind of regulations can be really game changers. So it's not only climate neutrality, because climate neutrality, in order to achieve climate neutrality, there is a need to absorb the extra CO2 emissions into peatlands, into less intensified fields, and into old-growth forests. So I propose to take a break for questions, because I've been fairly long.
Hello, everyone. It's been a long time for presentation, and I think it's good to take a break with a few questions. And by the time of coffee break, it's also around. We remain with the 27 minutes. So I would like to allow everyone to ask a question in any simpler language. You can be asked a question. We need more question in your intervention. Thank you. With the starting by.
Thank you. My name is Rugezi Ornithology. It's all about in your report about 9% of deforestation globally is being caused by agriculture, and this both cultivating crops and rearing livestock, and this is key driver of human-wildlife conflict. And when people degrade those forests, wild animals also come, and that the farms of people and that the animals from forest come in the farms of people, and that is another cause of human wildlife conflict. What is your thought or your side about human wildlife conflict? Thanks.
Of course, I don't. So many of you will be agronomists or ecologists or scientists, whatever. But I have also my limits as a matter of. So of course, I'm quite. I have another type of education than trade lawyers, commercial lawyers, or civil lawyers, because I have to delve much more into scientific issues. So when I have to help an administration to regulate chemicals, I have to understand what the chemical at stake is about. My answer can be only extremely nuanced. It seems to me that from my own experience that a good public policy requires communication. And I remember yesterday there was this issue that was discussed how to we are imposing on the Rwandese farmers rules regarding cutting trees, the prohibition of poaching. I think what matters is to explain, in particular at school level, the rule. In primary, secondary, and also university education. I'm very happy that many students attending this conference, and that also learned that there were a number of clubs in universities of students interested in environmental issues. So communication matters.
From, oh, this is suitable. Okay, can I use this for my life? The buffaloes are in the forest. And one day the people came just near to the park went to maize. And buffaloes enjoy the maize. Now the problem is, in Israel is Masaka. You have a general in Israel, Maria Masaka. Non someone as Buto was very simple. No one was also the see the moderation like Masi. Japan is a Gomba Kuna. This is simple. This one is a women-wildlife conflict. It's an issue which needs solution from you. Now, just how? Now, first of all, you need to know exactly where I will plant my crops, where the animals are, the distance between your crops and where the animals are. This is the one. Let me take a simple example. Who knows the around Nyungwe, the people coming from west, you know, have the tea around Nyungwe National Park. This is a good buffer. This is a good barrier for conflict management, because no animals, even buffaloes and other things, cannot eat the tea. You can use tea for crops and then reduce the conflict between
breach, it's important to sanction the breach. If you don't sanction, there is a feeling of immunity. So let's my neighbor has been dumping hazardous waste, is not being prosecuted. So why on earth I'm going to pay 10,000 Rwandese francs to a company to manage my hazardous waste? And so it's really important to have a quick response because there is no rule of law in case breach of the law is not sanctioned either by the administration through administrative fees or by the criminal jurisdiction. I think also the participation process in the when one discusses strategies, forestry strategy, agriculture strategy, that the different stakeholders can take part, can comment upon the proposal of the government, to have open debate regarding the science, because the administrations have always something to learn of the government from the different stakeholders. And so the matter when it comes to agriculture and forestry is that often it's a very non-educated population that don't have really access to genuine education as you have, that are concerned by the limitation, by the restrictions, and so to listen. And that requires perhaps a more anthropological approach, to have more sociologists or anthropologists being able to have this link between the wishes of this population. What matters is to convince the administrators of the science of the rule. If the people are not convinced, they will always try to bypass or to cheat. So what I was really amazed, and I find that Rwanda is fantastic, is the safety on the roads. You abide by the speed limits. But it makes sense. You have been reducing the death toll. Look at Kenya. I've been reading many in Kenya. There are many pedestrians across the road, walking across the road, that are killed by the trucks that are driving much faster. So the rationale of the speed limits in Rwanda and the enforcement, because we have radars, makes sense because it's saving thousands of lives every year.
Thank you so much.
That's communication.
Thank you so much for the matter. I would like to request anyone who have a question to write down the question. We shall keep those questions there for the next session. So allow me to give one of our local authority to help to answer the question from online. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. There is our colleague participants who asked first by confirming that you know the forest, it's a good observer or absorber of CO2. Yes, we know, and we know much the plants are with green leafy, more capture or absorber the CO2. It's a principle or a science. And he come to mention that the crises and agroforestries are also good to absorb. And they asked, what's the role of the agroforestry in animal husbandry, especially modern dairy forms in Rwanda? So here, the agroforest contributes to carbon absorption too, at certain level. And the agroforestry contributes to feeds to our cattle, for instance. Our cattle, it's no. It's a source of cattle feeds, animal feeds. But coming to our symposium, what the role of agroforestry this animal feeding in carbon reduction. Yes, it's a question everybody may ask himself here. What the contribution of agroforestry and feeding the cattle here, for instance, to carbon reduction. Here in Rwanda there is, or the science found that the cattle, the animals, the mammals we see, more they eat, they are fed, more they emit the gases on the atmosphere. The animals nowadays are the contributors to greenhouse gases in atmosphere. It's a science. There is, yes, you know, where they, after eating grasses, they emit what we call the methane gas. And the methane gas is a source of, and they say it's the second source for the greenhouse gases to atmosphere after the CO2. Yes, you're going to search through your Google. And what is going down now? It's that the agroforestry specialists must introduce the glasses which can reduce when they are fed to animals. They may reduce the emits of gases, the methane. Yes, it's a science. And what the Rwanda is doing as the animal husbandry in modern, it's that we need to reduce the localness of cattle. More we grow more cattle, more we emit in atmosphere, the methane. What is doing that? They are proposing that Minister of Agriculture may advise to the farmers to grow one cattle but improve the less, if the cattle, the local cattle, with the corns, you know, going to give the production of 3 liters of milk per day. If you want 100 liters, it's meaning that you're gonna to grow more the cattle, the cows. They are advising that grow one cow to give the production of 30 liters per day instead of growing 10 cows. To growing one cow will emit a little emission. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Allow me to close this session here, so then we go for coffee break to avoid any delays for the next session. Thank you so much for your kind attention. I would like to receive more questions from you. Thank you. We are going for coffee break for 20 minutes. I need you here at 11:50. Thank you.